Now, in a few days' time, this House of Lords will be a spectacle of ceremony and pageantry as, from here, the Queen performs the state opening of Parliament. It was 50 years ago, in fact, that television cameras were allowed to view the event for the first time. And doing the commentary then, Richard Dimbleby.
This state occasion, which the world outside sees today for the first time through the eyes of television, begins here at Buckingham Palace, at the huge stone mansion that was built 250 years ago as a town house for the Duke of Buckingham, and was bought by George III and remodeled by Nash and only used as the home of the sovereign since Queen Victoria came to the throne. High above the front facade, which was only built as late as 1912, there flies today, a grey, rather still, misty day, the royal standard, symbol that the sovereign is present in the palace. Down below in the forecourt, the sovereign's escort of the household cavalry is waiting. 4 division with a standard, 116 officers and men. In the background you see the quadrangle from which the Queen's coach will come, where another guard of honor waits. And outside, there are crowds of people who've been waiting since early this morning to see the coach go by from the palace, down the Mall, through Horse Guards into Whitehall, and so to Westminster. We ourselves now come to Westminster. You see now, up Whitehall in the distance, Westminster Abbey on the left, the buildings of Parliament on the right. In the background, rather shadowy in the morning fog, Big Ben looming into the sky, showing 10:22, the clock which some people have called the wristwatch of the world. There, the end of St. Stephen's Gallery by Westminster Hall, and then the great grey buildings of the Palace of Westminster. This palace which was lived in until 1512 by our sovereigns, but today, rebuilt after a great fire 100 years ago, is the work of Sir Charles Barry, a huge Gothic building housing commons and lords. At one end of it, the right-hand end, there stands the enormous Victoria Tower, supposed to be the largest square-built tower in the world, 336 feet to the top. And on the top, there will fly later a royal standard nearly 1,000 feet square in size. Now let us go down and into the archway, the sovereign's entrance. It is here, through the black and gold gates, that the Queen will come presently this morning. In through this doorway, and from the doorway to the staircase, the royal staircase, which is just inside those doors at which we are looking now. Below its vaulted roof, the staircase rises up. There are 26 stairs, red carpeted today. The regalia room is in the far distance where the crown is kept. And now you see forming at the top of the stairs a procession of the bodyguard, the Honourable Corps of Gentlemen-at-Arms. They come right from the top, the Norman porch, which is outside that doorway at which we are looking now from the Royal Gallery, and into this gallery. We are moving gradually along the route that Her Majesty will follow, because she comes up the stairs and goes into the robing room. The head of her procession comes like this, through the doorway between the yeomen of the guard, and turns left into the Royal Gallery, on the route to the Lords. This procession of the nearest bodyguard to the sovereign, bodyguard formed by Henry VIII in 1509. Its standard in the centre, carried by Sir Bartle Edwards, has 2 battle honours on it, of 1513 and 1544. These are all distinguished retired officers of the services. It's their privilege to be closest to the sovereign. They pass the standard of the yeomen of the guard, held by the ensign. They pass the people, the invited guests who are crowded into this 110-foot gallery today, and they move slowly out of sight, lower their standard as they go into the Prince's chamber, which is the threshold to the House of Lords itself. Let us now then go ahead of the gentlemen-at-arms through the chamber and for the first time into the chamber of the House of Lords itself. Here, the chamber which we see, the world outside sees for the first time ever on the state opening of Parliament, is packed to absolute capacity. A procession is entering at the moment of the judges. They're taking their place just in front of the throne. In the foreground, a packed, solid army of peers in scarlet. The galleries are full of spectators. The peers and peeresses in their robes, with their gleaming tiaras shining in the light, fill the chamber. And yet, for all the colour, it is the throne at the far end that dominates the room. A throne which might be cut, as you look at it now, from solid gold. In the centre of the huge canopy with its 3 compartments, there stands the chair of state, on which Her Majesty sits, and from which she will deliver the speech today. It has the royal arms on its back, it has the crown above it, and on what used to be called the cloth of state, the royal arms again, in deep and vivid colour. On each side of it, the arms of the Prince of Wales and the Prince Consort, the chair where the Duke of Edinburgh will sit on the right, and below, the judges who are summoned to Parliament today on a writ of attendance, which says, and the Queen says it to them, "We strictly enjoin and command you, that waiving all excuses, you be at the said day and place personally present with us." And so, obeying the order, they come to sit on their 2 small woolsacks, on which you see they are sitting a small cluster of judges together with their full-bottom wigs, some of them in black and gold and some in scarlet and ermine, as they have done sitting upon these small woolsacks since the reign of Edward III. To the left of the judges, there sit on the front row the bishops. They alone, the figure of the Archbishop of Canterbury at the far end, the Bishop of London. Behind them, a dark array compared with all those in robes, because only 1 or 2 are in their own ceremonial robes, the ambassadors and the envoys of countries from all over the world, who vie with each other to accept their invitations for this occasion today. This throne, Pugin's work for Queen Victoria, is supposed to be the finest example of Victorian Gothic in the world. We pass it now and look to where the ambassadors' wives sit, all in fine clothes, in full evening dress with tiaras. This dazzling mass of peers, a sea of scarlet picked out with white and with black. And we look down the full length of this chamber, the second oldest debating chamber in the world, to where, in a small space at the end, the representatives of the Commons will come at Black Rod's summons to attend the Queen. And on each side are the members of Parliament of the other House, who have come here already informally, have balloted for seats, and have taken their seats on each side of the entrance. Above that, there is the clock, and above the clock, the most important press gallery, where the debates that take place in the House are heard and are transmitted to the world outside. This then is the room in which the Lords spiritual and temporal debate and sometimes revise the bills that are sent to them by the House of Commons. And though the powers of the Lords today are limited, it still exercises its function of ensuring, as it's put officially, that the will of the people is precisely and reasonably interpreted. And this it does in this carved and gilded chamber, with stained glass windows above, and as a memory of the freedom of the people and our democracy, the 18 carved figures of the barons who managed to squeeze Magna Carta out of King John. Even they are here, high in the roof, looking down on the sea. Now another procession is moving. This time it is the Crown procession. Sir Terence Nugent, the controller of the Lord Chamberlain's office, carries on a cushion the state crown. He is escorted by the crown guard of 2 gentlemen at arms. He brings the crown past the dismounted troopers, 36 of them, of the household cavalry, their swords. This, the state crown. Up the staircase, escorted on the one side by the gentleman usher to the sword of state with the sword, and on the other side by the assistant controller of the Lord Chamberlain's office holding the mysterious cap of maintenance. Between the yeomen of the guard, we've now moved ahead, we see standing with his back to us in the foreground the Marquis of Cholmondeley, the Lord Great Chamberlain, who administers this palace of Westminster for the Queen. He takes from the controller the crown. He turns and carefully brings it forward to a table set at the side of the gallery. Now yeomen of the guard have taken over the guard duty from the gentlemen at arms. All salute and bow to the crown. The controller, Lord Chamberlain, march away. And now the assistant, the gentleman usher with the sword of state, and the assistant controller with the cap of maintenance hand over their charges. On this side to the Earl of Hume with the cap. On the other side to Field Marshal Viscount Montgomery, who has the honor today of carrying the sword of state. And we look now to this setting, to the doors of the robing room, and into it there comes the 3rd procession of the day. This of the officers of arms of the heralds, of the men who have such wonderful names as Arundel, Bluemantle, Portcullis and Clarenceux, Fitzalan and Lancaster, Richmond and Rouge-Croix. And they, the heralds, in their unchanged tabards of the centuries, all agleam and a-glitter with colour, holding their ebony staffs of office, march away to take their place on the staircase to head Her Majesty's procession. Now for a moment, as the scene awaits the next movement in this great ceremonial today, we can look at the state crown. The crown, which was made for Queen Victoria in 1838, and remade 99 years afterwards for George VI, and refashioned for our own Queen at her coronation, of gold and silver. In the brow, at the bottom, the brow band is the 2nd part of the Cullinan diamond, the 2nd biggest cut diamond in the world. Above it, that little dark ruby in the center, or little it may appear to be to us, really it's a very big ruby, is the one which Henry V wore in his crown at the Battle of Agincourt. And above that, at the top of the crown, there is an orb of diamonds representing the world, and a cross surmounting the world with a green sapphire in the middle, the sapphire which was believed to have been in the ring of Edward the Confessor. So the crown waits with its guard of the yeoman, and flanked on one side by this cap of maintenance, which may perhaps have been a hat worn by the dukes of many hundreds of years ago as a best hat, and today it's carried for the sovereign. Though as she wears a crown, she cannot also wear this cap of maintenance. In the background, the high doors lead through to the robing room, the room into which Her Majesty comes to stand beneath the portraits of her ancestors before yet another state chair, and there to put on her crown, and then to come in the full majesty of her state procession through the doors. This gallery is full of the pictures of the kings and the queens of the past. Statues of kings and queens stand beside each doorway. Henry V there in gold. On the other side, Queen Elizabeth, of whom a record of her opening of Parliament here reads almost exactly as though it described the ceremony of today. And behind, through our history, other kings and queens who stand watching. And now we move outside the Palace of Westminster into the misty morning, to where the Guard of Honor, down below by Old Palace Yard, stands waiting for Her Majesty. The Guard of Honor of the Queen's Company of the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards, the tallest men in the Brigade of Guards. Behind them, the shape of Westminster Abbey, and set against it, gleaming white, the statue of King George V. King George, the Sailor King, the Salty King, who himself made many pungent comments about the difficulty of the monarch in performing the elaborate ceremony of the day of the state opening of Parliament. And now his statue stands there as though watching for the moment when his granddaughter will come to do the same. And here indeed we are in the very cradle of our history, because there the Guard of Honor in its familiar uniform stands below. The Henry VII Chapel is on the left, Whitehall in front of us, leading back to where Her Majesty is due now to leave Buckingham Palace. And here the first part of the Sovereign's escort, the household cavalry, begins to move out through the gates of the palace forecourt. And you see now how quickly and how accurately the great pattern of this occasion is moving together. It's like a jigsaw puzzle of many colors, and piece by piece is dropping into place. As something happens inside the House of Lords, some tiny ceremonial, so here at exactly the moment, the Irish state coach is leaving the palace quadrangle, bringing Her Majesty on the first part of her journey to Parliament. It's drawn by the royal greys, familiar horses, some of them old in the service of the Queen. And the coach itself is one which was bought by Queen Victoria, who saw it in Dublin, and she bought it from the Lord Mayor of Dublin. And there we see for the first time today Her Majesty, with fox furs about her shoulders. On her head, the diadem made for a man, made for George IV to wear outside his cap of maintenance, and always worn now by the Queen when she opens Parliament. On her left, the Duke of Edinburgh. And they wave to the crowds who greet them as they leave the palace in this maroon and black and golden coach. Not the first time that Her Majesty has travelled in it. The coach in which she travelled to Westminster in 1947 for her own wedding, sitting at her father's side. The escort rides ahead. The standard follows behind. And meanwhile now another part of the pattern falls into place. Inside the Palace of Westminster, the Lord Great Chamberlain is taking the crown from the cushion on which it has been lying for the past 4 or 5 minutes. He knows that at this moment the Queen's procession is on its way down the Mall, and he therefore takes the crown through into the robing room. In the background you see those who are to help Her Majesty with her robes and her crown. The doors close, and we shall not see them open again until Her Majesty emerges. Now this gallery is 110 feet long. It leads from that doorway at the top of the stairs. Her Majesty having gone into the robing room, the main part of the procession comes up the stairs and straight on. The Queen turns away as we watch to the left. The procession then comes straight towards us and turns left along here, down the full length of the gallery, past the pictures of the former kings, the huge fresco in the background there of the death of Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar, past the portrait of Edward VII and Albert, the Prince Consort, at the end, and over a floor inscribed with mosaics, covered today with a rich royal blue carpet spreading its whole length, and then moves out under that archway into the Prince's chamber. And there in a moment we may perhaps catch a cry, make way for the Lord Chancellor, because his procession is the next one to move in this ceremony. And we shall see his procession coming towards us from the Prince's chamber, through that doorway which lies between us and the House of Lords, at which we were looking just now. Though the gentlemen at arms may be the closest bodyguard to the Queen, these, the yeomen of the bodyguard, are the oldest guard. They were formed by Henry VIII before the days of the gentlemen at arms, and their uniforms have changed hardly in a detail in 400 years. Now we look back at the doorway, hoping that we may hear the cry. And here there moves into the doorway the dignified little procession bringing the Lord Chancellor, headed by Sir George Coldstream, the Clerk of the Crown. Behind him, the Sergeant-at-Arms and Mace-bearer, Sir Paul Maltby. Behind him, the purse-bearer, who carries the Lord Chancellor's purse, in which the Great Seal of the Realm is normally kept, which today houses something much lighter, the manuscript of Her Majesty's speech. Behind him, the stocky, dignified figure of Lord Kilmuir, the Lord Chancellor, in his robe of damask all trimmed with gold, his wig, his velvet court suit, and gleaming buckled shoes. The head of the law, who presides over the debates in the Lords, who is the keeper of the Great Seal and appoints all our judges. Behind him, the train-bearer, behind him the assistant sergeant-at-arms, and then Black Rod, the Queen's messenger and representative in the Lords, the familiar figure to many of you of General Horrocks. That procession goes out to the staircase to join those already waiting. The sword of state is borne down by Viscount Montgomery towards the bottom of the stairs. There goes underneath the figure of the Lord Chancellor and Black Rod. And now, even as this is happening, let us go back again outside to Whitehall, because there, at Horse Guards, the royal procession has come down the Mall and is now moving towards us across Horse Guards Parade, where Her Majesty sits every year to take the salute at the Trooping the Colour ceremony, through the archway led by her household cavalry, and towards us to turn down into Whitehall. Life Guards and Royal Horse Guards share the duty of escorting the Queen, and share, in turn and turn about, the honour of being either before or behind the royal carriage. Today, first escort in front, first division in front, second division behind, then the 4 state landauls that bring the household, and then the last division of the household cavalry to bring up the rear of the procession. And after the divisions of the escort, the colour of the dark horses, the bays and blacks, the household cavalry, to the greys from the royal mews. And through this narrow arch, the Queen's coachman today, Coachman Coos, brings the Irish coach. The Queen was saluted as she passed Horse Guards, and now an anthem plays as she turns into Whitehall. The sound of the anthem dies away, and into their places, inside the chamber of the Lords, there come the members of the royal family not in the procession. You now see, escorted in, their glittering tiaras and diadems, the Duchess of Gloucester, the Duchess of Kent, wearing the orders and decorations of the family, Princess Alexandra of Kent. Next to her, the Duchess of Beaufort. So the ladies of the royal party have now joined the assembly here. In front of them, At the end of the front row, leaning forward, you see His Royal Highness, the Duke of Gloucester, who arrived with the royal party. And sitting next to him, the Duke of Somerset, the Duke of Buccleuch, who is talking to the Duchess of Gloucester, the Duke of Wellington, now once again from the warmth and colour inside to the grey morning outside, to look up Whitehall, to where the royal procession, coming at its exact time, is jingling and trotting and clattering down Whitehall past the cenotaph. And how grey and wintry the day looks from here. It's led by household cavalry. When you see the coach coming into Parliament Square, you'll see it being drawn by those famous horses, Macquarie and Eisenhower, the Outriders, and Waterford, Tipperary, Tedder, Tralee, and Cransford and Routmarch, drawing the coach itself. It's come now to the bottom of Whitehall. It has to cross Parliament Square and turn into Old Palace Yard, past Westminster Hall. Then the Queen's Company, tallest men of the 1st Battalion, the Grenadier Guards, will give the royal salute, and the band of the Irish Guards will play the royal salute as we watch the coach and Her Majesty swing round into the Sovereign's entrance, and so Her Majesty will have arrived at the House of Lords. So let us now watch and listen as the royal procession comes to the end of its journey. And so the Queen has been received at the door of the house by the Master of the Horse, the Lord Great Chamberlain. Now the procession moves up the staircase towards us. The heralds, the pursuivants, the heralds, and the kings of arms lead it. There follow the 2 sergeants-at-arms with the maces. Behind them, the gentlemen ushers. After them, the equerry-in-waiting and the groom-in-waiting. Charon, Sir, King of Arms, Norroy, King of Arms. On the left, Lord Hailsham, the Lord President of the Council. On the right, Mr. Butler, the Lord Privy Seal. The Lord Chancellor in the centre, Garter, King of Arms, on the left, Black Rod on the right. And behind them, the Sword of State in the centre, and facing Her Majesty and walking backwards, as they do the whole time that she is in Parliament, on the left, the Lord Great Chamberlain, on the right, the Duke of Norfolk, the Earl Marshal. The Sword of State passes from our sight, and behind we see Her Majesty the Queen, in a dress of silver lace over silver tissue, the diadem on her head, wearing the Order of the Garter, and she turns away out of our sight with the Duke of Edinburgh, followed by their household, towards the robing room, while the head of the procession comes through into the gallery and turns very slowly, walking at the accepted pace of state, slowly in to its position in the gallery. Sword of state is borne towards the robing room doors. Black rod and garter take their place and turn to face. So, for a moment, the scene freezes, becomes almost a tableau before us. And so the Queen has gone to put on her crown. And now there's a pause for 5 minutes. So let us now go back on film just under 2 hours to 9 o'clock this morning, when in the Prince's chamber at the other end of this royal gallery, the yeomen of the guard paraded to undertake their traditional duty of searching the vaults under Parliament. They were issued with their lamps, the lamps which they have carried for hundreds of years, and then at 9 o'clock the Secretary to the Lord Great Chamberlain gave the order.
Start the search.
Yeomen of the guard. Turn! Right! Turn! Head left wheel. Low! March!
So the search begins. At steady pace, in solemn procession, led by the representatives of the Palace of Westminster and the Office of Works. And though nowadays, of course, it is, as you can see, not much more than a formality, I think the yeomen would be very surprised if they did find an intruder in the building. But this old custom has never been filmed before. Indeed, it's never been seen before by anyone outside the precincts of the Palace of Westminster. Sergeant Major of the yeomen with his stick, and the yeomen themselves following, all retired warrant officers and NCOs of Her Majesty's forces, and a police inspector at the rear, pass through the Lord's chamber, through the Peers' lobby, over the mosaic floors, and so on their way to the vaults underneath. And the reason for the search? Well, simply that 353 years ago, a group of Roman Catholic conspirators, including Guy Fawkes, plotted to blow up King James I as he opened Parliament in the House of Lords on November the 5th, 1605, in protest at the anti-Roman Catholic laws that the king was applying. The plot was betrayed by an anonymous letter, and on November the 4th, the day before the state opening, the yeomen of the guard, dressed just like this, descended into the vaults under the House of Lords, and there found Guy Fawkes and 1.5 tons of gunpowder. And ever since, just as we celebrate Guy Fawkes' Day, so the yeomen have searched these vaults immediately before the state opening of Parliament, just in case. And so the search is made. We return now to the Prince's Gallery, feeling, no doubt, the more secure. And the scene is much as it was when we left 7 minutes ago. In the chamber, all is prepared, and the scene is again unchanged. Perhaps I can give you now the official explanation of today's ceremony here, and the part that Her Majesty the Queen plays in it. This is the one occasion in the year when the three estates of Parliament, Queen, Lords and Commons, meet together in person. Queen on the throne, the Lords in their places in the chamber, like this, and the Commons, headed by the Speaker, the Prime Minister, and the Leader of the Opposition, standing at the bar of the House of Lords. Lords and Commons hear the Queen's speech telling them the programme Her Majesty's ministers propose to introduce during the new session which the Queen is opening. And when the Queen has read her speech, she leaves the Houses of Parliament. And, of course, Her Majesty takes no part in the discussion which will start this afternoon in both Houses. That, then, is the framework of this occasion. We move back again from the chamber into the royal gallery. In a minute or two, we may expect Her Majesty to emerge. Meanwhile, for a moment, we can look at Portcullis and Fitzallen and Bluemantle and Rouge Croix and Rouge Dragon and Arundel and York and Chester and Lancaster and Somerset and Windsor and Richmond, at the heralds, at the sergeant-at-arms, the treasurer of the Queen's household, Mr. Oakshott, conspicuous because he alone is not in uniform but in morning dress. Beyond him, the grooms and equerries in waiting. Sir Michael Adine, the Queen's private secretary, figure standing on the right just by the yeoman of the guard. And so, gradually, we move down to the senior members of the household. Lord Tryon, who is the keeper, the privy purse, Lord Hailsham in the foreground, Mr. Butler in the background. The Lord Chancellor holding his purse. The officer, the exon of the yeoman of the guard. Blackrod, Garter Principal, King of Arms. A space with the blue velvet carpet by the doorway. The Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, controls our great state ceremonies. Facing him, on the right the sword, on the left the cap. The yeomen of the guard, standing on each side, the state trumpeters in state dress in the doorway, and then the doors themselves with the doorkeepers on duty, through which we shall see Her Majesty coming. And we await the moment when the Lord Great Chamberlain will come in from the robing room, will give the signal for a fanfare to be sounded, the doors to be opened, and Garter, King of Arms, will signal the procession to move. And there then, at this historic moment, just before 11 o'clock, is the scene as the Lord Great Chamberlain enters. The light is reflected on the Agincourt ruby, the great diamonds, and the cross over the world on the top of the crown, reflected from the silver lace and the crystal leaves now partly hidden by the robe of Parliament. Before the Queen they'll walk backwards, still backwards, never turning their faces from Her Majesty, the Earl Marshal and the Lord Great Chamberlain. There, behind the Queen's gown, this gown of silver, is the Parliament robe of crimson and ermine. She wears diamonds, the collar of the garter, and the star of the garter. And thus, in Elizabeth, by the grace of God, Queen, are vested majesty and radiance in harmony together. Now the procession, the head of it, moves into the chamber of the Lords. The lights slowly are increasing. The chamber has been waiting in darkness. The light now burgeons up into gold. As to the right comes the head of the procession, and to the left, the Lord Chancellor now coming through the door, and Garter behind him. And in a moment, the lords themselves and all their guests and ambassadors will see Her Majesty enter and will rise as she appears in the doorway. They see the backward figures of Earl Marshal and Lord Great Chamberlain. They see cap of maintenance and sword of state. A pause, and Her Majesty the Queen. Queen now ascends the steps of the dais to the chair of state, and there she will command the lords to be seated.
My lords, pray be seated.
The Lord Great Chamberlain has received the Queen's command, which he acknowledges, to signal to Black Rod. Black Rod receives the command to summon the Commons, turns, and starts his walk of 150 yards through the lobbies of the Houses to the very doors of Parliament. He will be gone for 2 or 3 minutes. And we see the scene here in Parliament, in the Lords, for one moment, much as it might have been at any time in the past 400 or 500 years, unchanged, like a great tapestry. The Queen sits waiting. She can look right down the length of Parliament to where, if the doors of the Commons are open, she can see the Speaker himself sitting on his throne. We look slowly down the chamber. In a minute or two, Her Majesty's speech will begin. The legislative programme which we shall hear in this speech is prepared by the government of the day, and it refers to measures which it intends to introduce in the next session of Parliament. And whatever the government, whatever the legislative programme, the outline is always given by the Sovereign in the speech from the throne at the state opening. Her Majesty, in making the speech, is taking no part in party politics. She is above them. She takes no part in them. We look down the serried ranks of peers and peeresses. We think of Black Rod down at the Commons, where, as he has approached the doors have been slammed in his face, in token of the day when a king went to Parliament and stormed in to arrest 5 members. Ever since then, Parliament, the House of Commons, has denied immediate access necessarily to the royal family. And Black Rod must knock 3 times on the doors before he is admitted as the Queen's representative. We look down now. You see in the centre Lady Swanborough sitting among the peers, one of the new life peeresses who were introduced into the House only a few days ago. She, in common with the peers, is bareheaded as she sits in her own right. Her Majesty sits quite motionless, and the whole House stands in silence and motionless about her. They are waiting for the moment when the third estate of the realm will enter the chamber. The mistress of the robes, the mistress and lady of the bedchamber stand to the left. The Duke sits motionless in the ceremonial day dress of an Admiral of the Fleet. And here comes Speaker Black Rod, Clerk of the House behind, the Prime Minister to the left, Mr. Gateskill, the Leader of the Opposition. And in their pairs, supporters of the government and supporters of the opposition, who bow to Her Majesty and join Parliament. Now then are the Commons represented historically at the bar of the House, with the Speaker at their head. They settle into position. The Lord Chancellor to take from his purse the manuscript and to hand it to Her Majesty. And when he has returned to his place, so we shall hear the beginning of what is always called the gracious speech.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, I look forward eagerly to the tour of Canada, which I shall carry out next summer with my dear husband. The peoples of Canada and the United Kingdom have long shared a common destiny. It is our hope that the friendship and understanding between them will be strengthened still further by our visit. We also look forward with much pleasure to our stay in Ghana in the autumn of next year. This will be my first opportunity of meeting my people in this new member country of the Commonwealth, and I particularly welcome it. I hope that it will also be possible for me to visit Sierra Leone and Gambia. In the spirit which inspired the recent Trade and Economic Conference at Montreal, my government will seek to promote the closest cooperation within the Commonwealth. It is their firm belief that the Commonwealth has a unique contribution to make to the progress of human society. They will also continue to foster the prosperity of the overseas territories which are in their charge. New legislation to maintain the provision of financial assistance for colonial development and welfare will be laid before you. My government will neglect no opportunity to promote the advance of the colonial territories and the increasing association of their peoples with the management of their own affairs. They are taking energetic steps to protect the employment of the people of Malta and hope that the forthcoming constitutional discussions with the Maltese political parties will set the pattern of a stable and thriving future. They are deeply concerned at the situation in Cyprus and the tragic loss of life involved. They will persevere in their efforts to secure a settlement, ensuring tranquility and progress in the island. I shall be very happy to welcome the Shah of Iran on his visit to this country next May. My government will seek to play a full and constructive part in preserving peace and justice and promoting improved standards of life throughout the world. To this end, they will actively support the United Nations and the North Atlantic Alliance and other regional pacts of which they are members. They will cooperate with the United Nations and the countries of the Middle East in any measures likely to relieve international tension in that troubled area and to take account of the needs and aspirations of its people. Negotiations on the possibility of securing a controlled suspension of the testing of nuclear weapons are due to begin in Geneva on the 31st of October between my government and the governments of the United States of America and the Soviet Union. It is the earnest hope of my government that these discussions, in which they, together with the government of the United States, have taken the initiative, may prove fruitful. My government will also continue to seek an agreement on disarmament in the hope that thereby the fear of war may be lifted from the minds of our own and succeeding generations. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you in due course. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, my ministers are resolved to ensure the strength of sterling at home and abroad and a high and stable level of employment. In cooperation with the Commonwealth, they will seek to expand our overseas trade, both in Europe by the creation of a free trade area and throughout the world. A healthy and thriving agriculture will remain among the principal objectives of my government. Legislation will be introduced to enable special assistance to be given to small farmers and to provide for further support with the Agricultural Mortgage Corporation. A bill will be laid before you for the protection and control of deer in Scotland. My ministers will continue to help the fishing industry. They are supporting in the United Nations a proposal that a second World Conference on the Law of the Sea should be convened soon. It is their hope that this may lead to a lasting settlement of the problems of the territorial sea and fishing limits, which are of grave concern to British fishermen. It will be the special care of my government to introduce measures to promote the social well-being of my people. Proposals will be laid before you for placing the National Insurance Scheme on a sound financial basis and enabling a larger section of my people to build up pension rights related to their earnings. Effect will be given to many of the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Mental Illness, and the provisions of a new bill will replace the existing law on mental health in England and Wales. My ministers will introduce legislation to amend and strengthen the Factories Acts. A bill will also be brought in to repeal the Catering Wages Act and to convert the 4 catering wages boards, which are functioning at present, into wages councils. My government will continue to encourage the extension of facilities for higher education in the universities and technical colleges. In addition, they will announce new plans for developing the nation's schools, intended in particular to improve the scope and quality of secondary education. My government view with gravity the increase in crime. In the light of the most up-to-date knowledge and research, they will seek to improve the penal system and to make methods of dealing with offenders more effective. My ministers will continue their efforts to secure a just balance between the expanding demands of the modern state and the freedom and status of the individual. They will introduce bills to improve the basis of compensation for compulsory acquisition of land, to give further encouragement to home ownership, and to provide for the future management of the new towns in England and Wales. Legislation will also be proposed to establish a modern code for the general regulation of building in Scotland. Believing that the traditional rights and liberties of my subjects should be safeguarded by permanent statute, my ministers will seek specific statutory sanction for the continuance, for a temporary period and in a restricted form, of certain economic controls deriving from wartime emergency powers, and will allow the remainder to lapse. Other measures will be laid before you in due course. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, today, for the first time, this ceremony is being watched not only by those who are present in this chamber, but by many millions of my subjects. People in other lands will also be able to witness this renewal of the life of Parliament. Outwardly, they will see the pageantry and the symbols of authority and state. But in their hearts, they will surely respond to the spirit of hope and purpose which inspires our parliamentary tradition. In this spirit, I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
Her Majesty returns the text of the speech to the Lord Chancellor. the Earl Marshal, and the Lord Great Chamberlain now come together before Her Majesty to bow to her, to signify that all is in readiness for her procession to return to the robing room whence it came. All rise. As the pages of honour come forward to take Her Majesty's train, sword and cap precede her. Her Majesty bows to both sides of the chamber and turns to follow Earl Marshal and Lord Great Chamberlain, who still walk backwards before her, out through the doorway. Later today, in the Commons, the debate, doubtless the argument over the government's programme will begin. But for now, as Her Majesty returns to the robing room and thence to Buckingham Palace, she leaves behind in all of us a memory of a state occasion at its most magnificent, and seen for the first time in our history by millions of people, not only in our own country, but throughout the continent of Europe, from Sicily to Scandinavia. The throne remains rich and shining, near and yet remote, the symbol of this rare meeting of the Queen, the Lords, and the Commons, the three estates of Parliament. And so begins, with ceremony that springs from the very roots of our democratic history, the fourth session of the 300th Parliament of the realm.